Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're peeling back the layers of our closest celestial neighbor, the Moon, to separate some wild conspiracy theories from some even wilder scientific reality. So here's a wild thought for you. What if the Moon is actually a giant, ancient spaceship just parked in Earth's orbit? I know, it sounds like something straight out of a movie, but for decades, people have seriously claimed our Moon isn't what we think it is. And this isn't just some random internet thing either. It has a surprisingly specific and, pretty bizarre history.
And get this, the idea really took off thanks to two Soviet scientists, not novelists, scientists. Back in 1970, they published an article where they basically proposed, completely seriously, that the Moon was an artificial satellite, a giant, hollowed-out world put there on purpose by some kind of super-advanced alien civilization.
Okay, so let's really dig into this. Where did this whole idea of a hollow spaceship moon even come from? And what was the so-called evidence that made people think, you know what, maybe this is real?
So the basic idea has been floating around in science fiction for a while. You can even find it in an H.G. Wells novel from 1901. But it was during the Cold War that it was pitched as a serious possibility. You gotta remember, this was the peak of the space race. Humanity was literally reaching for the stars, and it felt like anything was possible.
Now, the people who believe this theory aren't just going on a hunch. They point to a few really specific things about the Moon, things they see as total smoking guns. To them, these oddities are proof that the Moon is an artificial construction.
Okay, so there are three big arguments they always bring up. First, the Moon's density is way lower than Earth's. Second, there's this story about how it rang like a bell after an impact, based on data from the Apollo missions. And third, the craters. They're all weirdly shallow, almost as if something stopped the impacts from going too deep. You know, like a reinforced metal hull.
Let's zero in on that density gap for a second. The Moon's density is about 3.3 grams per cubic centimeter. Earth's is 5.5. Now, for the believers, that's a huge red flag. I mean, how can a solid body be so much lighter than the planet it orbits? Their answer is pretty straightforward. It can't be solid. It must be mostly empty on the inside.
So, what's the deal? An alien megastructure? Or is there another explanation? A natural one? Well, to figure that out, we have to stop speculating and start looking at the hard data. The kind of data that scientists have spent decades gathering.
You see, to really understand a whole other world, you can't just look at it through a telescope. You have to listen to it. You have to weigh it. You have to analyze its actual guts. And scientists have come up with some incredible tools to do exactly that, letting us peer deep beneath the lunar surface.
And this has been a long-term investigation for sure. It really kicked off with the seismometers the Apollo astronauts left behind. Then, it took a huge leap forward in 2011 with NASA's Grail mission, which mapped the Moon's gravity in incredible detail. And just recently, we've entered a whole new era with China's Chang'e 6 mission bringing back the first-ever samples from the Moon's far side. Super exciting stuff.
It's this really powerful three-part strategy. First, you've got seismology, which is basically listening to how vibrations from moonquakes and impacts travel through its insides. Then, gravity mapping tells us about the density of all the different layers. And finally, sample analysis. That's our ground truth. We get to study actual pieces of the Moon right here in labs on Earth.
And, well, when you put all that data together, the picture that emerges is pretty clear. And let me tell you, it's not hollow.
So this is what science tells us today. The Moon isn't some empty shell. It's a solid, layered world. Scientists call it a differentiated body, which just means it has a complex, internal structure. A lot like Earth, actually. Just, smaller.
We found evidence for a solid inner core that's rich in iron, a liquid outer core, and a thick mantle on top of that. And what's really cool is that some very recent analysis just found a soft, kind of gooey, partially molten layer at the very bottom of that mantle. These are all telltale signs of a natural, geologically complex world, one with a long, dynamic history.
Okay, so let's circle back to those anomalies we talked about earlier, because for every single one of them, science now has a clear, evidence-based explanation. All right, that ringing like a bell thing, it's not because it's hollow. It's because it's incredibly, incredibly dry. Here on Earth, all the water in the crust kind of acts like a shock absorber, dampening vibrations. But the Moon doesn't have that. So when a moonquake happens, the vibrations just travel on and on through its super rigid, fractured rock for a long, long time.
And what about its lower density? Well, that actually points directly to how it was born. And it was a violent birth. The leading theory, the giant impact hypothesis, says that the moon formed from the lighter stuff that got blasted into orbit after a Mars-sized planet slammed into the early Earth. So it's less dense because it's literally made from the lighter leftovers of Earth's crust and mantle.
And those shallow craters? You don't need a reinforced alien hull to explain those. NASA's Grail mission uncovered something pretty startling. The moon's crust is, and this is a quote, almost completely pulverized. It's been hit by asteroids and comets for billions of years, so its surface is basically a super deep layer of rubble, and that loose, crumbly material just can't hold the shape of a deep crater.
But here's the thing. Just because we've debunked the spaceship theory, that doesn't mean the moon has given up all its secrets, not by a long shot. In fact, the more we learn, the more we realize we're just starting to scratch the surface of the real mysteries of the moon. I mean, take that recent discovery of the soft, partially molten layer deep inside the moon, which was just confirmed in 2024. That find tells us the moon's interior is way more dynamic and still has more heat than we ever expected. It's forcing scientists to completely rethink how the moon evolved over time.
And then there's this. For the first time ever, we have actual pieces of the moon's mysterious far side sitting here on Earth. We're talking about almost 2,000 grams of soil and rock brought back by China's Chang'e 6 mission. This is an absolute game changer for lunar science.
And these new samples, they're already showing us some really big differences. Turns out the soil from the far side is way less dense than the soil from the near side. This is our first real, physical proof of a major lunar puzzle that scientists call the Great Dichotomy, which is just a fancy way of saying the two sides of the moon are fundamentally different from each other.
So you see, the real questions that scientists are trying to answer now, they're not about aliens. They're about deep, fundamental planetary science. Why does the moon have two completely different faces? How is water spread out inside it? What in the world happened to its ancient magnetic field? These are the real mysteries we're chasing.
So the big takeaway here is pretty clear. The moon isn't some hollowed-out alien spaceship, but the scientific truth, the story of a complex, evolving world that holds the secrets to our own planet's past, that, in its own way, is even more incredible. And the best part is, the real exploration, it's really just getting